Welcome to episode 2 of Photoshop for Beginners. This time we're going to be covering some of the selection tools that Photoshop has to offer. This video is going to be in two parts. This video is part 1. And in part 1 we're going to be looking at the Marquee Tool and the Lasso Tool and the different options that each of these give. And then part 2, the selection tools, I'm going to cover the Magic Wand and the Pen Tool. Right, let's get into it. So both the Marquee Tool and the Lasso Tool allow you to select various parts of an image in different ways. With the Marquee Tool, you've got 4 options, and these can be accessed by either clicking and holding the Marquee Tool on the toolbar, or you can press Shift and M to swap between these two options. Two of the Marquee Tool options I'm not going to cover because we don't really use them ever, but what they do is on screen for you, so if you want to pause and have a read of them, they may apply to you and something that you're working on in the future, but I've never used these two Marquee tools in my time using Photoshop. The two options that we're going to look at are the Rectangular Marquee Tool and the Elliptical Marquee Tool. These tools allow you to either select a rectangular or square part of an image, or an elliptical or circular part of an image. To keep your selection a perfect square or a perfect circle, if you just hold down Shift as you click and drag your mouse, that will constrain the selection to a perfect square or circle. Once you've made your selection, whatever you do to the image will only take place in that selection. So here I'm copying and pasting the image with the commands Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. These are obviously common keyboard shortcuts that allow you to copy and paste words in text documents, for example. Here in Photoshop, it lets you copy and paste parts of images. You can also hit Ctrl-X, which cuts an image, like you cut text in a Word document. And obviously you can hit the delete key, and that does what it says on the tin. It'll delete that selection of your image. Both Marquee tools work in exactly the same way. The only difference is the shape that's made. If you'd like to select more than one part of your image or expand your current selection, then you can do that. You just need to make a selection first, and then if you press Shift and click again, and then let go of Shift, that will add the new selection that you're making to the previous selection. You can see here that if two sections touch, they're going to combine, and that makes a bigger, more complex selection. And then once your selection's made, as well as obviously copying and pasting, you can affect things with like the paint bucket tool and the paintbrush to colour in just that section. We're going to cover these tools in a later video, but it's worth knowing if you're just wanting to have a play around. Okay, next we move on to the Lasso Tool. With the Lasso Tool, you've got 3 options, and again, like the Marquee Tool, you can access these options by either clicking and holding on the toolbar on that tool, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Shift and L, and this will just flick between the 3 options you've got available to you. The standard Lasso Tool allows you to make your own selections freely with either a mouse or a graphics tablet. The magnetic Lasso Tool lets you make a selection and the computer will try and stick to the outline of what you're trying to trace. And then the Polygonal Lasso Tool, this lets you make your own custom selection by creating a polygon essentially. So here with the standard Lasso Tool, you can see that I'm just using the mouse and I'm loosely drawing a selection, and then I use copy and paste to move that selection elsewhere. I could also press delete to completely remove it if I wanted to. The Lasso Tool does come with some options, and they're at the top of the screen. This is the same place that we mentioned in the last video. With the Lasso Tool, at this stage, you will only really need to use the feather setting. The feather feature allows your selection to fade away at the edge of the selection, so it's not as harsh. This feature is available on the Marquee Tool as well, and I'm going to cover feathering at the end of this video, so just know that those options are there for now. The Select a Mask button, we're going to cover later on in the series, just because it's a little more advanced than the scope of this Photoshop for Beginners series. But masks are really powerful and they're worth knowing about, and again, we'll come to that later on. The next Lasso Tool is the Magnetic Lasso Tool. This is really handy as it does do a lot of the work for you, and in the right circumstances can provide great results. You can see in this image, the Lasso Tool sticks to the edge of the balcony frame as I draw roughly around the edge. The magnetic lasso tool has a few more options than the normal lasso tool, feather again being one of them. So if you go ahead and press caps lock on your keyboard, this will change the cursor from a pointer to a circle. Now with the width option, this changes how big the circle cursor is, which changes the scope of where Photoshop is looking for the next sticking point. Next along is the contrast tool, which doesn't have a huge effect on the selection process, so we won't cover it here, but I will put a link in the description for further reading. If the magnetic lasso tool is struggling sometimes on your image to make a selection, it could be that the contrast setting needs changing, but for the most part I usually leave it as the standard. And the final option is the frequency setting. This simply states how many times Photoshop will put a point on your selection, and the more points, the smoother your selection will be. If you're struggling with ugly, sharp edges on your selection with the magnetic lasso tool, then you can up the frequency. This will try and make things smoother. The last lasso tool is the Polygonal lasso tool. This lets you click at various intervals around your page and create a selection that is a polygonal shape. This is very useful as you can make a lot of complex shapes with this selection whilst having a lot of control. To use this tool, you click where you want the start of your selection to be, and then you can let go of the mouse button and then freely move your cursor to where you'd want the next point of your selection to be. With all the lasso tools, you end your selection back where you started. As you can see in this selection here, I go back to where I started and this finishes the selection. Photoshop lets you know that you've reached the start of your line again, because it puts a little circle next to the cursor icon. As with the Marquee tool, if you want to combine selections or make more, you can do so by making a selection and then pressing Shift and starting your next selection. Okay, so that just leaves feathering as the last thing to cover. Feathering fades your selection out of the edges, which allows for a softer transition when you manipulate your image. Here you can see me using various selection tools with the feathering number at different points. The number you're going to need will vary depending on how big the image you're working with is, so it's worth playing around with it until you get a feel for what settings is best for you and your current project. A good use for feathering is adding a vignette on images. Here I use the Marquee selection tool to make a black overlay on the image, and then using the Elliptical Marquee tool with a feather, I delete the center of the black overlay, and that allows for a vignette to appear. You can see here that this isn't the best. I might want to have done a square selection with a higher feather. It's just worth playing around for the style that you want to achieve. Okay, if you made it this far, then thank you. In the background here, you can see me quickly using the Polygonal Lasso tool to remove part of the balcony image, and this reveals a view out onto the beautifully sunny Wellington, New Zealand. In this video, we've covered the Marquee and Lasso tools, and hopefully you can see that they're very powerful tools for making selections and a range of shapes. There are of course more advanced things you can do with these tools, but I believe what we've covered today is more than enough to get you going. A big part of learning Photoshop is just, as I've said before, just playing around and just getting used to the tools, and if you can't ever really break anything, because you can just press Ctrl-Z and undo what you've done. Again, this is Photoshop for beginners, so I don't want to get into the minutiae of each tool, as we would not get through the series, because some have like so many settings that you can tweak. But there is obviously Photoshop's documentation on their website, other tutorials. I highly recommend going and looking at all the tutorials you can find to get a really broad understanding of Photoshop. I'll put some links in the description. As I said, just read everything you can, and just learn more and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. It will be the part 2 of this video, which is Magic Wand and the Pen tool. And the Pen tool is my favourite tool in Photoshop. It's so powerful and it lets you do quite a lot of stuff. In most instances, it does render the selection tools we've covered here, kind of pointless, but it is worth knowing about these tools because they do have their pros over the pen tool, which we can discuss in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.